stand-up comedian, and a Moth Storyteller. This session today will be mostly storytelling. This is important, so please refrain from interrupting his flow. We will have some time for Q&A/discussion in the end. Please welcome Sudhir.
Thank you. It's February 21, and I am in San Francisco Union Square. I'm on the 11th floor of an old historic Art Deco building. On this floor, there's about 15 small doctor's offices. And outside each office, there's about 10 people lined up. I'm there to get this special kind of COVID test, which didn't exist in Ashland yet. I need that test so I can board a flight from San Francisco to New Delhi, India to go see my dad, who's not doing too well. I remember only a couple of days earlier, I'm in my house in Ashland, and I have all my hospice training manuals laid out in front of me, all my notes, all my books on life and death. And I'm also on the phone with my older brother and my mom in India. We're discussing my dad's health situation. And we're talking about things like, how's his eating? Is he drinking enough? Is he dehydrated? How's his breathing? Is he talking at all? What's he talking about? Is he talking in metaphors? Right after I got off that call, I immediately booked my tickets to India. Luckily, my COVID test came back negative, and a few hours later, I'm on a 15-hour non-stop flight from San Francisco to New Delhi, India. I get off the plane 15 hours later, come out the airport, and there's a taxi waiting for me there. And this is a taxi that I pre-booked. And I'd already spoken with the driver. He kind of knew me. He knew how urgent my situation was and how badly I needed to get home in time. What I didn't know at the time was, as if my journey already wasn't stressful enough, we find out that New Delhi, a city of tens of millions of people, was having one of the biggest protests in the history of the country. A bunch of farmers were protesting some new government laws. And because of that, all the streets and roads and highways in and out of New Delhi were completely shut down. And what I also didn't know at the time was that my driver was part James Bond, part United Nations conflict resolution expert, because he figured out a way to maneuver around this situation, and he bribed, threatened, did whatever it took to get me out of that situation. So I remember driving through these dusty streets of New Delhi at 2 a.m. in the morning, and my driver is pulling all these Indy 500 maneuvers. He is oftentimes driving on the wrong side of the highway, dodging people, cars, stray cows, and dogs. And while we're doing this, I get a phone call from my daughter in Ashland. My daughter's 15, and that felt great. I'm like, wow, my daughter cares about me. She's checking to see if I landed safely. I pick up the phone, and my daughter goes, Dad, I need help with math homework. Now, luckily, I had paid good enough attention in high school math, so I was able to help her. And the few problems that I didn't know how to answer, I blamed it on sketchy cell phone connection. There's still a few more hours to go, and I decided to take a little nap in the car. It's the middle of the night. I wake up a few hours later, and it's the best time ever because we are just entering the foothills of the Himalayas, where my dad lives. So from New Delhi to my hometown, it's a 5-hour journey by road. And my parents live in the foothills of the Himalayas. And so we're just entering the foothills of the Himalayas. It is morning and the sun is slowly coming up. And it feels like home. I roll down the windows and I can smell the morning sandalwood incense on the streets. Little restaurants on the side of the street cooking yummy Indian breakfast. And I can hear devotional music coming from these little temples. I get home at around 9 a.m. in the morning. And I immediately go upstairs. I say hi to my brother from 6 feet apart. Go upstairs, take a shower. I double mask, put a face shield on, a lot of hand sanitizer. And in my back pocket, I have my COVID negative test results. And I head straight to my dad's bedroom. My dad is laying in bed, and my mom is sitting right next to him, as she has done for the last 10 years, because she's been his primary caretaker. I go over to my mom, give her a hug, tell her I love you, I'm here, it's gonna be all right. I look at my dad, and he seems to be taking a nap. His mouth is a little ajar, his eyes are slightly open, and his breathing is irregular. So I thought he's taking a nap. I go over to him and I start talking to him. I'm like, Dad, I'm here, open your eyes, it's gonna be all right. My mom is telling him the same thing. Look, your son's here from all the way from over there, open your eyes, talk to him. But he's not responding. Now, if there's one thing we've learned here as hospice volunteers, it's that usually the sense of hearing is the last one to go before somebody dies. So I took that knowledge and I kept talking to my dad. But he wasn't responding. I still kept talking. I would, hold his hand, rub his forehead, give him a foot massage, all the things I learned here. But he wasn't responding. And then, after about half hour, I saw a tiny micro movement in one of his eyes. And I thought, wow, now he's going to open his eyes and he's going to start talking to me. That didn't happen. But I saw a tiny little teardrop form in the left corner of his eye. And it's getting bigger by the second. I zero in into this teardrop and I can almost see my reflection in it. I realize that teardrop is my only window of opportunity into communicating with my dad one last time, and vice versa. In that teardrop, I saw a lifetime of joys and sorrows, ups and downs, things that were said and left unsaid between us. But above all, I felt a deep sense of relief and closure. My dad passed away a couple hours later, literally in our laps and surrounded by loved ones. Right before he passed away, my older brother and I, we picked him up from the bed and we put him on the ground. Now in Indian tradition, there's a certain items on the checklist that if you check off, my dad is going to have a good journey beyond. And the first one is to put them on the ground. The idea is that we come from the 5 elements, and when we die, we have to merge with the 5 elements. And earth is one of them. The second thing we did was we put a few drops of our holy water in his mouth. So our holy water is the water from the holy river Ganga, or the Ganges as it's called. Lastly, a few leaves of holy basil, also known as tulsi. And then we chanted some mantras in his ear, thereby checking off everything on the checkbox. And that felt great because not everybody gets an opportunity like that. People always miss something. They may not have the holy water or basil. So this was a good sign that my dad's going to have a good start to his journey. I looked at my dad's face and I'd never seen him this peaceful and calm and joyful. Once again, a familiar sight over here for some volunteers. The surroundings, though, were quite contrasting because by now people were starting to cry, especially the women. You could hear all different pitches and volumes of crying. The men, however, were a little subdued, as expected. My brother and I, a few minutes later, we picked up my dad and we took him to the living room. And by this time, people had already cleared out the living room of all furniture. And there was a mattress there with a clean white sheet, and we laid my dad on top of that. And then the ladies brought blankets and quilts, somewhat like over here, and they covered him up. It was middle of winter after all. And my mom was real particular about how to tuck him in because she thought he's going to be cold. And then we covered my dad with the saffron sheet, and this was going to be his vigil or wake for the rest of the day and throughout the night until next day morning when we cremate him. And around my dad are thin mattresses with spotless white clean sheets where people who come to offer condolences, pay their visits, respects, that's where they sit down. And by now people are starting to trickle in. Immediate neighbors and close family first, and then as the day progresses, people driving, taking flights. And most people, everybody has their own way to express condolences and grief. Most people were kind of quiet and they would say nice things to my mom. They would highlight the good qualities of my dad and praise my mom's courage for taking care of him all these years. But every now and then, there would be people who would just start howling like hyenas, and that would catalyze others to join in. And it was quite a cathartic process. There were also a few of the mystics and the poets in there who would come and start quoting some scriptures, dropping some sort of knowledge, either fake or real. But it all came from a good place. So this went on all day long, and one thing was clear: the women were much better at expressing the whole range of emotion. Men were still a little subdued. They were also either actually busy or pretending to be busy to plan the logistics of this whole thing, because by now already several hundred people have visited. Chai is being passed around every 15 minutes, and somebody has to plan the rituals that happen for the next 13 days. That's a lot of work. The amazing thing, though, was that the family didn't have to do any of the work. So me, my mom, my older brother, we didn't have to actually do any of the logistics. Everybody else just jumped in and took care of it. Like I remember one of our close neighbor friends, without asking us, he just took 2 weeks off and he just took over all the major portion of the logistics. I have to say in my family there are a few very strong women who were calling all the shots. So this goes on, for the rest of the day. Towards the evening, the people coming in to offer condolences kind of tapers off. And it's mostly close friend and family at this point. It's starting to look like some sort of slumber party, because everybody's on these thin mattresses on the floor around my dad, and my mom is the center of the attention. And there's cousins and aunts and uncles I haven't seen in decades. There's a lot of stories being shared. Stories about our childhoods, and stories about how my dad was like when he was a kid, and what sort of trouble we used to get in. And chai would be passed around every 15 minutes. And of course, there would be a lot of spontaneous crying, followed by laughter, because a couple of the aunts were super funny, so they would make everybody laugh. So it was a lot of crying interspersed with laughter and a lot of stories. Towards the night, now it's time to go to bed, and everybody sleeps on the floor. So for the first 13 days, which is the mourning period, you're supposed to curtail all the pleasurable or enjoyable activities. That means you have to sleep on the floor, eating only bland food, which is cooked by neighbors, so there's no cooking in the house. I have to tell you though, that bland food is still 50 times better than anything we've tasted in a local restaurant. It's not that bad. And then not only that, there's things like men are not supposed to shave, so there's no enjoyment. And lastly, that includes praying to any kind of gods. You can't go to a temple. And that's because the belief is that your focus should be the deceased person who died, and on all the rituals that supposedly enable them to move towards nirvana or moksha, instead of praying to some gods. So, it's nighttime, we sleep on the floor, wake up next day morning, and it's time to give my dad a ceremonial bath. And then he gets a new pair of clothes picked out by my mom, his favorite color, all that. And we put my dad on this temporary wooden bed made out of special kind of wood. It's covered with a red silk cloth, and it looks quite regal. Then we take my dad downstairs to the courtyard. So my brother has a 3-story house, and the courtyard would be at the street level. And there's a little section which has been consecrated or purified, and that's where we put my dad. This is the place where people can come and pay their last respects to my dad, especially the women, because the cremation that's about to happen is predominantly a male activity. And we can talk about the reasons later. But so everybody is going around my dad, offering flowers, prayers, saying their last goodbyes. Of course, there's people crying, there's a lot of emotion, last goodbyes. And then it's time to take my dad, put him in a van, and head to the cremation grounds, which is a couple miles drive. Now the cremation grounds are this amazing, beautiful place at the base of a majestic looking mountain. And this mountain has a lot of history, a lot of spiritual history. It's even referred to in some of the ancient texts like the Mahabharata. So it's amazing. When we get there, mysteriously, there's about anywhere from 500 to 1,000 people already there waiting for us. It's amazing how word of mouth spreads and people just show up to show support. You would think this only happens to celebrities or well-known people in town. No, it happens to everybody. Even strangers kind of join in. So we are at the cremation grounds, and it's time to get my dad out of this special bed made out of special wood. And we lay him on top of a pile of woods, which was going to be his cremation pyre. Once again, this wood is a special wood. I believe it's a combination of sandalwood and aloe. So we put him on top, and then the priest who leads the ceremony, along with my older brother, who's the eldest son, he's in charge of the cremation ceremony. Priest does a lot of chanting, rituals, offerings. We go around my dad several times. And then it's time to kick off the cremation. Me and my brother, we are handed this wooden stick. And at the end of this stick are this special kind of leaves. They are lit on fire. And it's time for us to gently put that fire right under my dad's head, thereby kicking off the cremation process. So this is what it looks like, and people sitting around being part of the ceremony. This would go on for hours, because the body it can take up to 6 to 8 hours to burn sometimes. All this time, rituals being done, there's chanting in the air, and it is quite a sensory overload, especially the aromas in the air. The special wood, sandalwood, aloe, coupled with clarified butter, which is also called ghee, mixed in with camphor. It's just an amazing smell in the air, and it's overwhelming. So the process goes on for a couple hours, and now it's time for the head cremation master, he's the person who manages the whole thing, to come inspect my dad's skull. And he's looking to see if my dad's skull has cracked open or not. Now, this is an important milestone, and it could either happen by itself, spontaneously. If not, we have to facilitate it. So me and my brother, once again, well, my dad, his skull didn't crack. And later on I was joking because he was in the military, so he was hard-headed. Once again, my brother and I are handed a bamboo stick, and we gently poke the top of his skull, and it cracks open. This is an important milestone in the journey, as in this is the moment the soul gets released from the physical body. More time goes by, and the cremation master comes back once again, and now he's collecting the remains, which in this case are mostly bones, tiny little bones. And he gives those to us. We wash them because they're covered in ash, and we put them in a clean white cloth. So these are the remains that we were going to take next day to the city of Haridwar on the banks of the holy river Ganga, where we would perform my dad's last rites. And then we go back home. Back home, it's the usual scene, except it's getting busier. There's a lot of logistics to be planned. My brother is doing a lot of rituals. And this goes on all day. Once again, there's a slumber party in the night. A lot of storytelling, jokes, crying. And then it's time to go to bed. Sleep on the floor. Some of us get woken up in the middle of the night. That's myself, 2 of my cousins, and an uncle. And that's because we're supposed to make a 5-hour journey by road from my hometown to the city of Haridwar, where we would then take those bones and perform my dad's last rites. So this is the gang, 2 cousins, myself, And the uncle is the wise one, he's the quiet one. He has one flaw though, a bad habit. He likes to drink chai every 15 minutes. We tried to send him to chai rehab, but it wasn't up for him. So we had downstairs, 4 of us with our little backpacks. There's a car waiting for us outside the house, and we were going to make this 5-hour journey. I have an extra item on me. All of us have these little overnight bags packed. I have this extra item, which is a red silk bag, and inside are my dad's asthis or bones that we collected from the cremation grounds the previous week. And the bag is tied around my neck because we're not supposed to put it on the ground, not even on the car seat. And so this is what that bag is. And I'm sitting in the back seat of the car. It's an amazing time. We're driving through the Himalayas, literally through 2 national parks. It is the middle of the night, so there's not much of a view. But there's a lot to catch up. I haven't seen these guys in almost a couple decades. So we're talking about stuff, and then we're also talking about the technical aspects of all the rituals that need to happen in Haridwar, and also subsequently for the next 13 days. Obviously, we stop for chai every 15 minutes on these little shacks on the side of the street. I'm sitting in the back seat of the car, holding this thing in my lap. And I remember I never felt so calm and peaceful and joyful, which even I was surprised because it's a very emotional, sad time. And you would think there'd be a lot of anxiety around traveling and all this logistics, but I felt really calm. And then a little bit later, and this might sound like I've been living in Ashland for too long, but I start to have some visions. And they're very vivid visions of me holding a child in my lap, and the child is happy, is smiling, making all these happy baby sounds, kicking its legs and feet. And I'm trying to make sense of this feeling. I'm reluctant to ask my cousins and uncle because I know what they're going to say is, you've been living in Ashland for too long. So after a while, I muster up the courage, tell them. They tell me it's quite normal. People have different experiences, but usually they are powerful and vivid. Some people have negative experiences, depending on the context. But overall, this is a great omen or sign that your dad is well on his way to the next level in the life cycle. So we take a little nap because there's still 4 more hours of journey through this thick forest. Take a little nap. We get woken up a couple hours later by our uncle. And he's telling the driver to pull over. And we know what it's about. It's like, come on, man, we just had a chai. Can't you wait until we get to Haridwar? But he insisted, he's telling the driver, no, pull over, I want you to pull over right now. And then my uncle points in that direction, and we see a family of elephants crossing the highway. Now this isn't the actual picture, because we couldn't take a picture, but this is pretty common. We're driving through national parks that do have elephants, and typically people will see them cross the highway. Well, lately they've made these overpasses to make it safer for them. But that's what he was pointing to, and history was being made. My uncle had us pulled over for a reason that didn't involve time. And from Indian perspective, elephant, Lord Ganesha, is the obstacle remover. So yet another sign that my dad is going to have a good time. We get to Haridwar at about 4 a.m. in the morning, check into a hotel. I'm still having that red bag around my neck. Freshen up, and it's time to head to the ghats. The ghats are what is the banks of the holy river Ganga. And it's basically steps that literally go into the river. That's where all the action happens in Haridwar. So we head there because it's time for the morning prayers, which is quite an event every day. And it is amazing. It's once again a sensory overload of sounds and smells and sights. There's thousands of people there. There's fire ceremonies, there's chanting happening, incense in the air, and there's people taking bath in the river because it's a holy river, supposedly washes off your sins. And you can hear little kids screaming because their parents are forcing them to take a ritualistic bath they don't want to. It's the middle of the winter. So it's an amazing experience. And after this, we head back to the hotel. And it's time to get ready for the last rite ceremony in a couple hours. But before that, we have to pay a visit to guys that look like this. Now these are the local record keepers, or I call them the local 23andMe or Ancestry.com. The way it works is anytime anybody visits the city of Haridwar, they pay them a visit, and then they record the reason why somebody came, and they update their family tree. So it's a genealogical record of sorts. It's all handwritten. So technically, think about it. I could ask them, tell me 100 years ago, which one of my ancestors came here, for what reason, and what did the snapshot of the family tree look like at that point in time. As an example, my daughter's 15, she lives here, and she's been to India about 6-7 times, but she's never been to the city of Haridwar. Yet she was already there in the records, because some other relative updated the whole family tree. After we're done with the record keeping, now it's time to head straight to the ghats, to the banks of the holy river Ganga, to start the last rite ceremony. It's also called Asthi Visarjan, which asthis are the bones, and Visarjan is the immersing of the bones in the river. So we head over there. We have to meet a priest at a specific time, at a specific place, right by the river, and that's where we're going to perform the rites. We get over there. I'm the lead performer because I'm the younger son. So my cousins and uncle are basically spectators, and they're just getting a kick out of it. And they don't want to get in the cold water. So I have to take several ritualistic baths, get in the water, and then the priest has me do certain things, sun salutations, offerings, chanting, prayers. Some of it involves specialized objects which he already brought with him. So we sit by the bank. I should have warned you, this one has nudity in it. So we sit there, perform all this is the priest, perform all these rituals, and then when we're done, it's time to take my dad's asthis or bones and immerse them in running water. And that's another milestone in the journey or process of my dad moving to the next step. We're going to talk about these things a little bit later as to why we do this and what's the logic behind it. So we haven't eaten all this time because you're supposed to fast until you perform the ceremony. So we're super hungry. And my cousins picked out this place. It's a couple hundred years old, and they make these authentic recipes which are centuries old. And it has to be vegetarian food cooked in a certain way because it's suitable for this kind of ceremony. So we eat a lot of food. My uncle has had another 6 chais. and it's time to hit the road and go back home. But before we do that, we have a little shopping to do. And it's not shopping for pleasure. We have been given a list of things which we can find only in the city of Haridwar or similar places, which are necessary. These are specialized objects to perform the rest of the rituals during the remaining 13 days. And this one, once again, is quite a visual sensory overload. We collect all these items, and that includes this thing I'm wearing. I got it over there, because my cousins forced me to do it because I didn't bring them any pajamas from the US. So we hit the road, and we're heading back. About 45 minutes into it, we are going by a city called Dehradun. It's a famous hill station, it's called. It's like in the hills. It's a famous city in India, Dehradun. And my cousins, there's a spontaneous debate erupts in the car. And they start debating on the technicalities of a certain ritual. My uncle is quiet, and I don't know much, so it's mainly between these two going at the subject. School goes on for 15 minutes, and then my uncle jumps in. He goes, guys, he's the wise one. He jumps in and goes, guys, I know it's been difficult. It's a sad, tough time, a lot of emotions flying. But I think I have just the solution for you guys. And the cousins go, okay, what is it? Tell us. And the uncle goes, let's pull over for a chai. Like, son of, he got us again. He wouldn't go to the chai we have. So we get back home, and it's the same scene, a lot more people now. And I can see like aunts and uncles that I haven't seen in so long. They made this journey, some took flights. And so now that my dad passed away, we cremated him. We did his last rites, the Asthi Visarjan in Haridwar. Now we are into day 3 of the 13-day mourning process. All this time that I'm gone to Haridwar, my brother is doing rituals back home. So I've thrown around the R word quite a bit. Rituals. An important question is, what is a ritual? And all cultures, traditions have their own rituals. But in simple terms, a ritual is a sequence of activities or actions done in a precise manner, typically chronologically. So it could be words, it could be offering objects, or it could be gestures, the mudras. And then rites. The word rite is used interchangeably with rituals, but in this context, it's more a rite of passage. And in Indian tradition, there's all kinds of rites of passage. Technically, there's about 40, and they're called samskaras. As an example, even before a baby is born, just the intention to have a child is a rite of passage. Child being born is another rite of passage, naming them, feeding them the first solid food, wedding, death, and beyond death. So there's lots of rituals or rites of passages. And then you might be wondering, okay, so what is the purpose of all these? And I've done my research, mainly on google.com, and I think it's all about people. And so there's 3 target audience for the rituals, if you will. Obviously the deceased, because we want to help them as much as we can so they can achieve moksha or nirvana. You want to set them up for success in their journey. Family is important, all the mourners, close family, friends. And then lastly, community. The community is a very important piece of it. And as we've seen, community comes together and there's rituals that enable that. So like I said, death, cremation, last rites, and all this is happening in a 13-day period of mourning. I call it the 13-day package towards nirvana, at least for my dad it is. So let's get into, real quick, we may not have time to really get into detailed discussions about these, but I'm going to touch upon what each day means. So day one, as we've seen, is cremation. Sanskrit word is Agni Sanskar. Agni is fire. And there's a couple of reasons for this, at least that I know of. The first one is the same old 5 elements. So you come from the 5 elements. When you die, you go back to them. So remember, we put my dad on the ground. That's earth. This is fire. The second reason is it's important at this point to decouple the soul from the physical body. And so cremation enables that because we are attached to physical things, the material world. So the idea is to how do we detach from that now that we've died, so that we can have a journey that is devoid of all those attachments. So the physical body is getting detached from the soul, or the other way around. Day 2, as we saw, we went to Haridwar, by the holy river Ganga, and we did the Asthi Visarjan, or the immersing of the bones. So we burnt the body in cremation, but we still have some remains, which means there's still some attachment. So how do we remove that as well? Well, we do that by immersing the bones in the river, thereby removing the last physical attachment. Once again, 5 elements in the water, so earth, fire, water, like that. And why do we do it in a holy place or a holy river? Is because it has supposedly a multiplier effect. So you perform the right rituals, and just by doing it in a holy river, the good effects multiply. So what happens in the first 10 days of the rites of passage? So total duration is 13 days, and the 10 days, we perform these rites every day, and I'm going to get into the details. And they call Anteshti 10 karmas. 10 is 10, karmas is literally rituals. So what's the idea behind these 10 days of rituals? By this time, the soul has left the body. It's still a little attached to family and the world. It's still a disembodied spirit of sorts, still a little confused. And we want to make sure that's not a hindrance in the journey. So the 10 days are all about, and the idea is that even to make the journey beyond, you need a subtle body, because you're not enlightened yet, which means you need at least a subtle body, some framework which you can use to continue your journey. So the 10 days are about physical body is gone, but you have to reconstitute the subtle body. That's the idea. So these are the things that happen on each day for those 10 days. And every day, literally, a priest comes in the morning, first thing in the morning, and there's about a 1 hour long ritual, which is led by my older brother. And so day 1 is focusing on reconstituting the head. And a lot of rituals involve making sculptures out of rice balls. And then in the evening every day, a scholar, a priest, comes and gives a lecture on what all this means. So it's not that it's a highly specialized knowledge that only a few people have. Everybody's educated on what this means, so then they can maybe improve their situation before they even die. Likewise, day 2 is face, torso. By the time you get to the 10th day, your subtle body is essentially reconstituted or recreated. Day 11th is a celebration. So the subtle body is back again, a bit of a success. We reconstituted it. So it's time to celebrate, because soon we're gonna send off my dad on this journey. And it's celebration and nourishment, which is usually by proxy, by feeding other people. So basically my dad is set up for success. Day 12 is about ancestor invocation. So ancestors play a key role in this tradition in helping my dad get to moksha or nirvana. So day 12 is ancestor invocation, known as Sapindana Parivartan. Parivartan is change. Essentially, we're getting ready to reunite my dad with our ancestors who've already gone through this process. Why? Because they can teach a thing or two to my dad, so it makes it easy for him. So at this point, the goal is to make the soul, in this case my dad, eventually he's going to become a respected elder. So he was my dad, passed away, he's still my dad. But guess what? With this process on day 12 now, he's ready to become a designated elder or an ancestor. Also, it means that he's not anymore a confused, disembodied, wandering spirit. He's ready for the journey. Day 13 is the actual installation of the ancestors. So this is where my dad merges with 3 generations of ancestors. There's a lot of rituals around that. Involves a lot of little sculptures or sculptures. Essentially, the ancestors, the assumption is they've already been through this. Some of them are already enlightened. Thereby, they can chaperone my dad on the journey. That's the idea. He's not going to be alone. And someday, when I die, my dad's going to be there for me. Well, hopefully. And then there's rituals that happen every month, every 6 months, and finally, the 1-year landmark is kind of important. So, to recap, somebody died and we did all this process correctly or not correctly. And then at the end of 1 year is when they open your profit and loss statement of karma. The karma computation happens at that point in time. And that's what decides what path you take next. I would say in the West, the equivalent would be Judgment Day maybe. So that's when, it's decided based on what you did, whether you can, be amongst your ancestors who are enlightened, or you have to take a rebirth, come back. It's like, when you enter the wrong password and you get a few tries. In this case, technically you get infinite tries, but you could also, come back as a lower being, as an animal, if you didn't do the right things. But that's the 1 year anniversary. So what is all this about? It's without getting into the technical details, it's important to see from a pragmatic standpoint, what do these things give us? I think to me, this is a good picture. This is a couple days after my dad passed away. And that's my mom. And these are three of my aunts. And this is a really funny one. She's also a local politician. So you gotta be careful. But my mom, she's doing her hair. That's my mom's younger sister. She's giving her a foot massage and putting socks on. And they're outside sunbathing in the middle of winter. So to me, this is what it's all about. Imagine if these systems weren't in place and my mom had to figure this out on her own. And that's why the community aspect is highly important. So that was my story. It happened last year, literally, so I'm still processing it. I'm learning from it. And the technical knowledge is kind of important, but that's not the key. And like I said, if you want to dig deeper, we can do another follow-up session. But that's my story, and thank you for taking time on a Saturday. Back to you.
Oh, you can say it.
Oh, that's right. So do we have time? I
I'm
don't know.
content, it's up to you all, but
Yeah, so if we have time, we can have questions, or I'm not an expert in everything, but we can have a discussion. Yes?
So when you put the bones, are they thrown in the river or do you get them back?
We don't get them back.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea is to just let them go.
They just go down the Ganga?
Yes.
Okay. So Sudhir,
Yeah.
this ritual obviously is so rich for your whole community and
Yes.
family. Will your brother probably have comparable ritual for his death? And what about you when your time comes?
Yes. So the idea is, if somebody doesn't have a son, now Indian rules are not that rigid. There are times, there are rituals that are male dominated, or it's recommended that a male does it. But if somebody didn't have a son, then what's done is you can designate the daughter as the lead performer, and that happens. Or you can designate the relative. Like that's a great question, because I do know when my dad passed away and we were going to Haridwar, everybody was telling me that my dad used to do this for other people. So let's say there's a family that either can't afford to go to Haridwar, or they're too old, or they don't have a son. My dad would always do it for them. So, yeah.
And so your brother will want to continue the tradition? And
I think so, from what I know.
I'm just wondering.
I can call him right now.
It's so rich, the tradition, and we just don't know how long they're going to carry on with you on this side.
Correct. That's a great. So, I'm kind of vested in it. So far, it is interesting though, so far, because it's my dad passed away. So it is an important question, like, what am I going to do next? You know what I mean? Because my daughter is 15. She grew up here. So, I don't know, maybe she already picked out a little plot for me. Who knows? But great question. Yeah. Yes?
I wonder what families here are likely to do, what rituals Americanized families or non-native families, what rituals are in place here. There's no hadar to go to.
Correct. Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. I believe there are services where, again, it's kind of done by proxy, or somebody else does it on your behalf, but it's still done correctly in India. It's not the same thing, but it is possible.
Would you mail your bones, for
Yep.
instance?
Literally.
And they go into the river there.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
Is it the same rituals for women when they pass?
Slightly different. Great question. So from what I understand is when the mom dies, let's say, Because they were telling me this, when my mom passes away, and this is a bit of an ego boost, but the younger son gets to do everything, so I'll be in charge. I'm going to kick out my brother. So yes, there's subtle differences, and like I said, there's a lot of rituals that it's recommended be done by women, but it's not a hard and fast rule. So there's always workarounds. Yes?
So do you feel like this process really has helped you through your grieving?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Just the community aspect of it. Like the cousins I haven't talked to in 2 decades. Now we texting every night. Of course, they want some Nike shoes from me, but that's But it's amazing. The support is incredible. And I would say it definitely helps. Because one thing is, me being here, it gives me assurance that, my mom's taken care of. Like even if my brother wasn't around, technically the community, the close family members, the relatives would rally around her and make everything happen.
It's not a question, but an observation.
Sure.
You had gone through this, what, a 26-hour journey to get there,
Yes.
to be thrown right into the whole situation, and the eventually, you must have had a lot to be able to handle.
Yeah, well, it was difficult, but like I said, us men, we're still learning how to express all that. So we get busy with the logistics, But yeah, I essentially made it 2 hours before my dad passed away.
Yeah.
So that's, according to my mom, he was waiting just for that. And us volunteers know that happens.
Yes.
That somebody who's dying will actually wait for a family member to either show up or even leave the room sometimes.
Yes.
So yeah, it was really helpful. We can also share, our experiences about rituals if you have time, maybe real quick. I would love to learn about different traditions, and if not, we can do it another time. I'll let you decide how much time we got.
I'm super open. It's a matter of whatever you all want to contribute to the conversation, that's great.
Yeah, and if somebody has to leave, please feel
Yeah.
free to do so.
By all means.
Sudhir, thank you. I always enjoy you every Saturday. Okay.
Likewise.
Thanks. Let's see here. Here we go. Thank you. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Nancy.
Take care.
I'd like to thank you all for being here on this very springy, rainy and sunshiny Saturday. Feel free to continue the conversation. I also want to honor what Ani has this afternoon. And yeah, the time is yours, surroundings. Use it as you wish, and I thank you all. And I'm here if you have any questions or comments or concerns. So thank you, Sudhir.
Thank you, everybody.